Hello everybody and welcome to our live stream. This time we're going to talk a little bit about interiors, how to create them quickly, and of course, as always, I'm going to show you some smart tricks that you can use in your day-to-day work because, well, it wouldn't be really worth your time if we wouldn't pack something worth your time into these streams. And guys, please tell me, can you hear me? Is everything okay? And of course, am I lagging? Because that's always one of those questions that you have to ask in the beginning of a stream. Of course, as you know, this is stream totally free, created by VizAcademy, and that's why I'm going to shortly introduce myself. I am Mike with 14, almost 15 years of experience in 3ds Max. I decided to become a tutor, and thanks to VizAcademy, I'm able to share my knowledge and professional know-how, well, with you, our students, and of course, you online guys. So guys, where are you from? Can you hear me? And of course, still, yes, sound is fine. So guys, as always, I'll ask you where are you from, because that's always good to know who watches us. And as you can, well, I can see that somebody's from Egypt. That's really amazing. And okay, without any further ado, we are VizAcademy, we are online school, and we will teach you how to create photorealistic visualizations in just 5 to 7 weeks, depending on what option you choose. You get two options, that is interiors and interiors plus exteriors. Okay, now let's have a look at our goal. Of course, this is work done by an architectural company that we will be sharing link to later on the chat, and all the credits for the design go to this group. But of course, we're going to do a quick case study on how to create the same effect in 3ds Max by simply going through the most basic tools, and of course we're going to have fun with it. So guys, Tony the support is with us, and if you have any questions, please ask them now. Iran, that's amazing. We have India and Poland. That means that we have quite far reach. And okay, let's now continue and move on to 3ds Max. I took the liberty of creating a little bit of cheats because we don't want to waste your time on finding the proper camera position and getting the proper resources. Usually when working with 3ds Max and your clients, you will get at least something that is going to be 2D file or CAD file, which is just going to be useful. And London, that's great. And when you work with 3ds Max, it's always most welcome to plan ahead. Why? Because 3ds Max is very punishing when you don't know what to do. In VizAcademy online course, we will teach you how to, which steps you should take first and what elements you should create as last. And now, as I said, I created this file earlier, so we're not going to have to go through the whole process of creating the walls from scratch, but still we're going to trace this file because we can be a little bit sloppy in this case, but we don't want to be too sloppy because we're going to still use the most basic of tools that we have at our disposal, and that is going to be create shape, and that is going to be line. And why should you always try to trace your own walls instead of just trying to use what you already have? Mostly because when you do trace those files, you often will find that those are not really good for extrusion, for any kind of modeling. You just need to, usually you just have to recreate them from scratch. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's going to save you a lot of time later on. And with that done, let's just create a little bit of extrusion now. Okay, I'm not really still I still haven't decided how tall this room is going to be, so I'm just going to convert this to editable poly. And as we're going to work with a lot of elements, we don't necessarily have to have this wall at this moment. So I'm going to move this back and weld it, because we're just going to use a box in here. Same will go for this wall, because I just figured that it's going to be a little bit easier to do it this way. Guys, have you ever worked with 3ds Max? And if you did, what is your experience? Because some of you already know, because I really like this, like to repeat that. But when I started working with 3ds Max, the first time when I opened it, I got so scared of all of those buttons that you can see in here that I basically didn't go back to 3ds Max for next 2 weeks. Our students really heard this story like 12 times already, but still it puts smile on my face, because well, this is how I started. As it goes for external walls, you don't have to be precise. You don't have to really care about the thickness of your walls. Luckily, we have some kind of files that we can pretty much trace, so that is exactly what I'm going to do. If you are still learning, that's, well, you came to the right place, because VizAcademy is able to teach anybody in just 5 to 7 weeks how to create beautiful 3D renders in 3ds Max and using Corona Renderer, which is really important for us. The Corona Renderer is a key element to your success. Okay, so we can basically decide on the height of this room thanks to this file that I have. By the way, guys, those of you that stay with us up until to the end and email us later after this webinar are able to basically get the same starting point of the scene, so you will be able to recreate it on your own. Okay, so now let's try to trace it, and without any further wasting time, let's just continue and work with 3ds Max. As always, I try to use the most basic of the basic tools. You don't have to snap, always try to avoid it, but since we have such nice files, I'm just going to try to use this to my advantage. Again, a big thing that usually people don't know how to create is arches, and we're going to show you how to do it the easiest and fastest way possible, because as I always try to tell you, we try to be as efficient as possible. Well, yeah, you can start learning 3ds Max, and honestly, on your own, you're going to have a lot of ups and downs, because 3ds Max is a really tricky software when you are trying to learn it on your own. It took me almost 14 years to get to this point, and believe me, my start wasn't really that good. Mostly because there was just no resources at all. You can now look up a lot of resources, a lot of techniques, but usually those are just one topic webinars that are not really covering anything. And now we are already doing the walls, which is basically the most important part for any interior. As you can see, I already added this camera, so we won't be looking for our perfect shot that we seen on this stream. By the way, guys, this is going to be our final image, and I hope that we will be able to do it in under an hour. So with 10 minutes out of our time, let's now hurry up and try to do it as fast as possible. As you can see now, I'm just ungrouping these files, because honestly, you could create arches by simply going ahead and doing this by editable poly and making sure that each element of your mesh is just perfect. But honestly, it's a waste of time, because before you actually finish welding and bridging all those elements like I do right now, you could basically just create a shape and be done with it in a second. So this is not really going to be a perfect solution. So we're just going to delete this and try to work with it as a spline. But how can we actually approach it? Well, by simply trying to trace the wall. As always, I'm not going to try to be 100% precise, because Corona is smart enough that it's going to understand that when walls are touching, they are actually not going to let any light through. So let's just create any kind of shape that suits our needs. And now let's move this shape to the same position as those arches are. Usually you would get those arches from your architect, but as I said, usually those files are really unusable. So if you want, you can just go ahead and create a simple spline out of rectangle. And here you've got corner radius. Well, that's not going to work well. So if you go to editable spline and try to move it up, now convert those two splines, I mean those vertices, to corner and start using this fillet. It's going to allow you to create a perfect arc. And of course, those arcs are already perfect because I've created them. We're just going to skip this step and we're going to simply attach them. Okay, but what now? What are we supposed to be doing at this moment? Since we already used Hsl and we used it on 40 centimeters, it's already in our, let's say, memory, and that's exactly what we're going to use. Let's just now move this wall closer. As I said, we don't have to be 100% precise, so we won't be using this at any point. For those of you guys that just tuned in, we are VizAcademy and we create online courses that will teach you how to create photorealistic visualization in just under 5 to 7 weeks, depending on the option that you choose. And you can go to our Instagram to check out the best proof that we can ever have our students' works. So as you can see, we only post the informations about webinars and solely our students' work. You can visit any kind of link, and there's probably going to be our students' Instagram, like here with Theodore, or you can try and look for yourself to pretty much get the best proof of our school that we could ever ask for. So let's go back to our modeling now. By the way, guys, will you use Photoshop in the scene? Yes, we will use it, but as always, we are going to try to make sure that the Photoshop is used at minimum. 3ds Max and Corona allow you to create beautiful effects just using the video frame buffer. So this is the clean render. This is actually coming straight out of 3ds Max without any Photoshop. By the way, guys, there's going to be a little bit of trickery because as you can see, we've got this nice displacement around here, and basically I already said that what we're going to do, and we're going to make sure that we have some kind of object that is going to decide where our maps are going to end. So that is going to be a lot of fun. By the way, guys, if you have worked with 3ds Max, what is your experience so far? What kind of rendering engines you used? And of course, how good are you in 3ds Max? By the way, wait a second. Okay. For those of you that don't know, 3ds Max is actually really easy, but you need a little bit time to understand how it works. It's never going to be straightforward because it always requires some kind of basic knowledge of 3D, or at least somebody who will guide you. Looking at this image, we now can start adding furniture. It really went from 0 to 100 in 15 minutes. So we're going to start adding windows, and we're going to add all the detail that you can see in the fastest manner possible. As always, I took a little bit of liberty to actually create shapes for our swept modifier, which we're going to use for most of our objects. So let's just try to trace our inside and inside of the room. Put it somewhere near the roof. Okay, so this is it. And now what we're going to do is use swept modifier. We're going to use our own, we're going to try to use our own shape that we already have here, and I'm expecting a little bit of problems with it. So we're also going to find a solution. So luckily there's no problem with it other than just, well, it's mirrored. If you have this problem, you don't have to necessarily go inside your object and try to rotate it this way. You can just try to mirror it and try to mirror it using the proper plane. So you can either try to use it in XY or XZ plane, and XZ actually worked the best. As for materials, by the way guys, what is the hardest part of 3ds Max when you try to work with it, when you try to create your own 3D visuals? What is giving you the most headache? For me, it was always the furniture, but luckily I learned that most of the furniture is actually really easy. Mostly because when people are trying to create some kind of furniture, and I mean those guys that will actually create it from scratch, those people are usually a little bit lazy, so they try to use the most basic shapes possible. That actually cuts the cost. So we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to create a quick box for the upper cabins, and we're going to do the same for the lower cabins. Luckily, I have this file to trace it, but usually you can just simply add any kind of value you like. So 85 is going to be enough. And make sure that you always work on the proper scale in your scene. So if you go to customize, use it unit setup, make sure that you work on centimeters by centimeters. If you are an architect, that may seem a little bit odd to work on centimeters instead of millimeters because you're so much used to it. But believe me, it's going to be easier this way. Why did I start from the molding on the ceiling and then created the furniture? Mostly because it's going to be easier for us this way. As always, I'm not going to try to be precise. I'm just going to try to trace as much as I can by going from one corner to the another one. And as you can see, it's really going really fast. So now we almost have our furniture, but there's still a little bit of it missing. So we've got a little bit of limiting object, and we still need to add those fronts. And how do we do it? It's very simple. We can try to add it by simply going with box, and now try to copy it as element. Make sure that you scale it down up until it's roughly 2 centimeters thick. Nobody is going to try to measure it, and you may be a little bit off. So you can even try to go a little bit inside. It's still going to be okay. So now, how many of those cabins we need? We need 6 of them. And let's just try to add 6 splines. So let me just select this front now, and let's go for ring, and we're going to connect. We need 5 connections to create 6 cabins, and now everything looks good. Okay, but it's still only a box with 6 connections. So what we can do is simply use chamfer, open this chamfer, and make sure that it's roughly something about 2 millimeters. As always, you don't have to be precise. Press 3 to go to the border. And now all the borders, so open splines, open polygons, are going to be selected. Here, by selecting this border, we're able to use cap. That is going to close those gaps and will allow us to basically start working with those objects as fronts. So again, we're going to copy those fronts, move it roughly to the position where our second floor is, second part of our furniture is. And now let's add something about 8 centimeters or 9. As I said, we don't have to be always, you don't have to always be precise, but if you're going to work with some kind of client, you will know how much centimeters you need. This time, this is only a live stream that you will be able to basically follow later on. So just use your own measurements, use your own colors, and do something that is going to surprise us. Okay, it's still too early for any kind of light, but let's go back to our camera view. Okay, we basically have the most important elements, but I noticed that I actually don't like one element here. So if we try to render this out in higher resolution, it's going to look a little bit low quality because we can actually count all those polygons. What we can do to avoid it is go back to our shell modifier, click on editable spline, and increase the number of steps. 24 should be enough. This is going to simply increase the amount of steps it takes this spline to break between the vertices. It's a very handy tool. Now look how many lines we have compared to the previous situation. Now this is going to look good, and if you want to be a little bit more precise, more power to you, go ahead. Now I'm going to press Ctrl V, so we're going to be able to copy this object, delete this shell modifier, and we are going to use this objects that we have here to make our window frames and our window molding. So first I'm going to copy this object. So one is going to be our window, the second one is not. Since we have this luxury of working on splines, I'm going to simply go ahead and divide it into 3. So we have now some kind of points that we're going to use to mark those windows. As you can see, there's a little bit of trickery going on, but nothing really fancy. So now I'm going to select this 3 bottoms, as you can see now, and we're going to copy them until we get the perfect shapes as we actually desire. If you try to rotate this, it's not going to work. So you unfortunately have to do it manually. Even sometimes, even if you try to change the pivot for your spline, it's not always ideal. So to not waste any time, I'm just going to quickly rotate those and put them somewhere closer to the ground. So you don't have to be precise. Always remember, even if it goes a little bit under the object, it's still going to look good. So we're going to leave it as it is, just as a proof. So now you go into rendering, and while you have this rendering enabled in renderer, we are also going to enable it in the viewport. So right now, as a default value, we have the radial, but we need rectangular. So now with rectangular selected, we can pretty much create those window frames. As always, you don't have to be super precise about it. You just need to do it roughly, because in this case, you can barely see any window at all. So without wasting time, you can actually move on. And if by any chance, when you will be doing the preview renders, you find out that, well, maybe the quality is not enough, then you can actually try and fix it. But before that, please don't waste your time. Okay, we have those shapes for molding, but we're also going to use this for our glass. So let's just do that and put it inside. So remember to not be over precise. You don't have to be. I'm just changing this color so it's going to be a bit easier for us to find it later on. As you can see, it's a simple shape that is going to be used as our glass. So for now, I'm going to hide it because we're soon going to start working on our materials. Okay, now the tricky part comes in. Because we're going to use a lot of shapes, we're also going to try to use the swept modifier as we did last time. But there's always a little bit of unknown when it comes to 3ds Max and over-edited splines that you will probably get a little bit problematic splines that are not going to cooperate. So here I've got this shape prepared earlier, and I'm going to pick it because it's going to help us. Again, guys, for those of you that just tuned in, we are VizAcademy. We designed our own course that is going to teach you how to create beautiful 3D renders from scratch in just 5 to 7 weeks. And by joining VizAcademy, you gain access to online support. Support actually sounds bad. You actually gain access to and contact to our tutors and teachers. That means that you'll be able to ask any kind of question related to the 3ds Max, and we will be able to answer it, of course, to the best of our knowledge. But at the same time, the support is unlimited. That means that you can ask any kind of questions. We do not limit knowledge. So the more you want to learn, the more you will. And now let's go back to our modeling. So we've got this shape, and actually those are actually cooperating. I'm really surprised, and this never happens during the live streams. So I'm really happy for this. At this time, I'm really surprised that it worked, because usually you have to do a little bit of fixing, and I was really prepared to do it for you guys. Okay, again, this shape is a little bit uncooperative because it doesn't want to be placed correctly. So we're just going to try to mirror it this time in X and Y planes. So let's just put it in the proper position. So it probably is going to be here. And now we've got all the moldings done. All we have left is adding the mid furniture. So let's just take a look at this scene. So most of the furniture is already done. And that is really, really good for us because we're going to be able to finish this as fast as possible. So let's just continue now. By the way, guys, those of you that just tuned in, please tell me where you're from. It's always nice to hear a little bit about you. What is your profession? What do you do in your daily day-to-day life, and what actually brings you to us? Because as you know, we are VizAcademy, and we're trying to teach as many people as possible how to do beautiful renders in 3ds Max using Corona Renderer. Most of the time, we're going to discuss all of those techniques and all of those we're going to share the know-how and everything else with you just in 5 to 7 weeks. And as you know, you can check out our students' renders on our Instagram, which is basically going to be the best example of our skill possible. Because there's just no better proof than somebody who finished our course and actually made a beautiful render. So you're from Yorkshire and Serbia. That's actually amazing. I would never in a million years I would actually imagine that we are able to reach Serbia, Egypt. That's really, really something. VizAcademy, can you tell me why Corona Render is better than V-Ray? First of all, V-Ray is a little bit overcomplicated. When it comes to rendering, it's going to give you a lot of no-go zones. It's going to create a lot of noise, and it actually takes a lot of time to get to the point where you can actually start rendering. Of course, it's not impossible, but when it comes to Corona, you have more artistic freedom because it's a little bit more let's say forgiving when it comes to modeling, when it comes to materials, and it actually works a little bit faster in some of the cases. But of course, to be honest, V-Ray has a little bit more options when it comes to really highly professional use, and I mean animation. But when it comes to interior rendering, which is basically what we do in our day-to-day work, I would never switch to V-Ray for, well, never. Mostly because it's just such a waste of time to work in V-Ray. You pretty much have to master V-Ray before you can actually do something in it. Hello, I'm a civil engineering graduate from India with 1 year of experience, but now switching to design field. Well, if you want to learn as much as possible, you came to the right place. Visit our website to learn a little bit more about our online course, which may be, well, helpful. So now we're going to make this furniture piece, and because my number one rule is never model what you don't need in your scene. We're not going to add any detail on it on this furniture piece because it's just going to be redundant at this point. We would actually waste time instead of gain anything, so we're just going to eyeball some of the parts, but also we're going to make sure that it's going to look good. So 4 centimeters as an inset, so select the bottom element. By the way, a neat trick for you guys, if you keep clicking on your object, so 1, 2, 3, you're going to select the bottom polygon, which is very nice, helpful, and for some people it may save you a lot of time because navigating to the bottom may take you a little bit more time, or to the top, and this is going to actually save you some of it. So now I'm going to move this a little bit to the back so it's going to be closer before I actually add those cylinders. By the way, as you can see, this is a really easy furniture piece, so I'm just going to trace it because all of you are going to be able to do it on your own when you actually receive the files. By the way, guys, email us and request the files on your own at the end of our webinar. So that is going to be only for those that actually stayed tuned. Do you provide exterior render lessons in your course? Yes, exactly, Daniel. We do, and we actually have a special session for it because interiors are a little bit different to exteriors. Interiors and exteriors are a little bit different topic, and they require a little bit different techniques. That means that we're going to spend whole 2 weeks only on exteriors, and that is counting that you already passed the interior course, because actually it's going to be mandatory to finish the interiors course because we need to know that you already know the basics, and from that point now on you're able to go into more advanced modeling. So as always, we're going to try to trace those parts of the model that are a little bit problematic. So let's go and use our palette. If you just go all the way and try to use the maximum value, at some point those points are going to pretty much have a stop, and they're not going to allow you to move them any closer to each other. That's when you can use fuse and weld, and it's going to allow you to create this nice shape. Again, shell modifier, which is going to be helpful. But this is the same situation I mentioned earlier. We still need to go to editable spline, turn off the rendering, and try to add a little bit more interpolation. Remember, those elements that are going to be closer to the camera need to have a little bit more detail. That's why, even though this is a really easy arc, we're just going to try to add a little bit more. Again, let's just put it in the right position. So something like 8-9 centimeters is going to be enough. Okay, and now how do we add those cylinders inside? Because, well, doing this manually will take you a little bit of time, and it's always going to look a little bit sloppy. In Corona Renderer, we have a technique that is really useful, and you can basically check out our last interior webinar, which was about creating a hotel lobby. But this time we're creating something else, so we're just going to use different techniques so you can actually learn something new. We're going to actually use tools, and instead of array, we're going to use the spacing tool. So let's just not grab any of those handles for your Beziers, and okay, everything looks fine. This is going to be our base shape. Control Q to isolate your selection. And of course, let's quickly go and create some kind of cylinder. Basically, because I already know what we're creating, I'm going to go for radius of something around 4 centimeters and height of, let's say, 70. I'm still not sure how tall this is supposed to be, so I'm going to use instances. And as I said, we need a little bit more detail in objects that are closer to our camera. That's why we're just going to select this as it goes. So, okay, this looks quite okay. Now, the trick comes in. You go to Tools, you select Align, and instead of Align, you just go for Spacing Tool. Spacing Tool is going to allow you to select and place some of the objects on splines or other points. So let's just pick the path. So this is it, and increase the count up until we actually get something that we like. Remember, this is not a perfect tool because each time when you move your camera, all of those objects are going to disappear. So it's not going to be very flexible, but I think that if we go to the top view and actually start adding a little bit more objects, at some point it's going to look good. 28 looks good, and let's just apply this as an instance. So it's going to keep this object still usable and change. It's going to change accordingly to the top one. So we can now align it and make sure that it's actually touching this top. This was actually luck. I didn't know that it was 70 centimeters. So lucky me, but my plan was to basically use this height manipulator to set the height of our object. Okay, now we're done modeling most of the elements, but we still have a little bit of windows to go for. So without wasting time, we're again going to create a box. The box is supposed to be as tall as your walls, so we're just going to make sure that it is. Convert to editable poly, make it a little bit lower, so we're actually going to use it to its extent. So let's just make sure that no door is going to be stuck by any objects that we add into our scene. Hey Mike, who was your inspiration? Do you have a CG artist that inspire you to make renders? There's a lot of them. If you go to any kind of website like Art Daily or Corona Forum, you can really find a lot of fine artists there. I don't want to give out any names because it's not going to be fair to some of the people, but I would say that it's really easy to find somebody to be inspired with. Just create your own Behance and you'll soon see how many people are actually amazing at what they're doing. And about what we're doing. So we're going to create this window frame in a second, but I still needed to pretty much make sure that we're able to guess the height, and of course we're going to add as much detail as we can. I already have this scene ready in different window, so we can inspect this object all together, because I don't want to actually go through whole process of creating a box and insetting it, because it would be a little bit redundant at this point. You already know how to add boxes, so there's really no trick in it, but we're going to use a little bit more time, spend a little bit more time when we will be talking about this window material, because as you can see, we have this nice effect going on here, which we are going to create. Hello again, late today, loved interior. Thanks for the webinars. Thank you, and well, you're welcome. By the way, right now in the audience, we have some of our former students like Theodore, and you can visit his website. I'm hoping that he'll share it on chat. So you can see how much difference does it make joining VizAcademy, and I'm basically really proud of Theodore, so that's why I'm mentioning his name for the second time. Okay, if you want to see how my snap settings actually work, there's nothing easier, because as you can see, I always use only these two options, vertex and midpoint. I use 3D snap, so it's going to be easier for me. Why midpoint? Because it's actually very common to make sure that to position some of the objects in the middle of others. So it's basically it. So as I said, we don't want to bore you with going through the boxes, so I'm just going to add in this object, the window object in here. So use scene material, auto rename material. Yeah, so we're going to use this, and still we're going to talk a little bit about the tricks in the materials. Okay, wait a sec. So this is not exactly copied yet. Okay. Now, we're just going to copy this. This is one of the plugins I like to use, that's called Copy To. It allows you to copy objects from one scene to another. That's basically free. That's a free plugin that you can download from internet. So just look it up, Copy To. It's very useful, and as you can see, it's well, works flawlessly. As I said, we already have some of the objects created, and to be honest, I don't want to waste your time on each and every object in the scene, because you know, this is just windows, and we already done them using the same technique. So here it wouldn't be anything else, but for those of you that are going to try to trace it, I'm going to add a little bit more detail into it. I mean, in the files that we are going to share. And now let's continue. As the modeling part is basically done, it's time to add the objects that we already have ready. We're not going to go through the modeling of all the pieces of furniture, because it would be redundant, because those models are already created by some other artists. I actually am going to use only models that are available online for free. So you can just Google it or find something that is going to be more suitable for you, and just add it into your own scenes. As always, try to work with the best quality objects that you can find, but as always, it's not going to be possible to find everything that you need. So basically, don't stress it. Just try to be efficient. And my trick, I mean, not necessarily a trick, but let's say my motto is that your viewers are not going to be able to tell the difference of 5%. So if something is 5% off, they're still not going to be able to say that anything is wrong. So that's your safe margin. Again, by going through imports, I'm just going to add all the objects, and we're just going to try to add them one by one, because always that requires a little bit extra work. But before we actually continue, we're just going to quickly talk a little bit about VizAcademy. So as you know, guys, we are VizAcademy, and VizAcademy is an online school which is going to teach you how to create beautiful renders in 5 to 7 weeks. We teach you both interiors and exteriors, which is two separate parts. That is actually going to be very well, productive for you, because you will be able to learn how to create interiors, what is the training program, and of course how to handle each step. So basically the first week is going to be modeling. So if you're totally new to 3ds Max, don't worry, we will teach you how to model from the basics to more advanced modeling. And of course, remember to ask questions. Then we're going to start creating lights. That's exactly what we're going to go for in a second. So from that point, we're going to move on to materials, and we're going to do some renders. So now let's try to yeah, the plugins really work well. So hello again today. Okay. Okay, about the linear workflow, most professionals use Gamma like BB3 Viz, Peter Gartner. but they don't mention how to set it up. To be honest, Gamma 0.1 is an outdated way of working with 3D, and I would actually argue that working with default Gamma of 2.2 is going to be most efficient for ArcViz, and working with Gamma 0.1 is not going to be necessary in most of the cases. Why? Because it's just outdated. It may be something that they found to be more comfortable for them, but the spectrum of light is actually going to be on your side when working with Gamma 2.2. It's going to produce a little bit of problem when trying to translate some of the materials, but it's not going to be time wasted when you start working with Gamma 2.2. So to answer it short, to sum up the answer, I would say that working with Gamma 2.2 is actually a better solution. Why? Because most of the models and most of the resources that you're going to find on your way are going to be created in that technique. Going back to 0.1 is just going to be, well, like going back in time and trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not going to work, and there's a reason why 3ds Max actually moved from Gamma 0.1 to Gamma 0.2 as a default, because it just works well. And okay, I am really unable to pronounce your name, but hello, it's nice to see you. Okay, now let's continue. Since our modeling is basically done, we're still populating our scene with all those extras inside. So of course we're going to soon start creating lights, but there's a little bit of tricks that are ahead of us. Guys, to not waste time by only adding these objects into the scene, we may actually move on to the second step of the scene, which is actually the done scene. I know it's a little bit of cheating, and basically I shouldn't be doing this, but to be honest, it's best to do it this way, because as you can see, it's basically the same technique. But this time I'm going to talk a little bit more about the objects that we're going to work with. So first of all, we've got this camera 1, which is basically, again, the same scene, same settings, but with all the objects already in place. So this is the difference, okay? And now let's continue and start inspecting a little bit of those objects. As I said, we need to talk a little bit about materials, but first let's start by rendering a white render. So let me just clear this up. And now we're going to go for Corona MTL. Remember to always preserve glass and portal materials if you actually are going to use portals. First of all, let's just try to render it out as a basic. Okay, this is not supposed to be happening at this point. So we're just going to clear this up. And I actually stepped ahead a little bit. So this is our white render. And now let's explore our light setup, because as always, we try to use the most efficient techniques. So in this case, we created basically just two lights. One is the environment, which is Corona Sky on default values. Nothing else was changed because, as I said, we want to work efficiently and we want to work really on the easiest possible materials. Will there be recording of this lesson? Yes, you will be able to view it online, just as you will be able to watch all other of our webinars, because we already created so many. Some of them are about exteriors, some of them are about interiors. By adding Corona Sky to our single map as an environment, we're able to lit our whole scene. This is a really basic step. We don't need any kind of light because our reference image doesn't really require it. The only trick that is really going to be discussed here is that we created this molding earlier, but it doesn't really have any kind of detail on it. More than that, it doesn't really have any kind of material that would suggest such a detail. That's why we used Corona Displacement Modifier with some kind of mapping. That means that we used Uvw Map, set it to planar. Instead of box, we had to use planar. So let's just create something like 15 by 15. Move it closer to our object and position this in the XY manner. Now, looking at this object, you can see that it's still not covering the portions that we like. So let's go for 12 by 12. And now if we go back to our camera, you'll see that this displacement modifier is going to be displaced, it's going to be displacing this texture, which we are also going to share because it was created by VizAcademy. Wait a sec, so this is the texture. Just simply added in blatantly as a displacement object. So once your render actually starts, you're able to render it with all this detail, and we're still going to use this to our advantage because we have to add 2 colors to our objects, and that's why we're going to try to deselect all of those objects that are not going to be useful for us at this moment. So let's now add all the materials that we already know that are going to be the most important. Oh, by the way, I forgot to add a little bit of description about this light in here. So that's only a Corona light set to rectangle. It's wide enough to cover all this kitchen, and of course it's only 1 centimeters 1 centimeters deep, so it's not going to be too big. So no trickery here, and let's now try to start working with materials. As always, we start from the biggest chunks of materials that we have. So that is going to be our walls and all the objects that are supposed to be covered by this nice paint. So first, I'm going to try to turn off the material override, but I already have a little bit of materials on it. So let's just try to add the materials to all of those objects all together. Or yeah, so now let's try to visit these materials. Luckily, I've prepared the materials for us because just going through all the materials would be actually a waste of time. So we're going to try to examine them one by one. So we've got the pink furniture. So that is going to be this part and the furniture in the back, plus all of those statues that you can see. So basically, these 3 elements are going to have this pink furniture material, and that's exactly what we're going to add right now. Let's examine this material for a second because it's basically really easy. Why do I have Corona color instead of color in here? Because I just wanted to be able to sample this color to other objects like the curtains that you can see here. Those are going to use exactly the same material. So we're just now able to sample the same color, as you can see now. And of course, this is the material copied from the basic materials from Corona Renderer. Did you know that Corona Renderer comes with a material library that is free for you to use? Well, now you do. Hey Mike, what kind of specs are you running on your computer? Corona seems to be really fast. Well, I'm using Threadripper, and that is 29. Okay, wait a sec. Okay, this is not supposed to be happening, but still. So this is my whole setup. So that's Threadripper 2970WX. It's 24 core, so 48 threads, and it basically calculates quite fast. So I strongly recommend you to get a good setup, but anything around 100 pounds is going to be rocking with Corona. And believe me, this is going to be really good. And now, with all that said, let's just start adding materials to our objects. Now, I've got these 3 objects selected, and I'm going to select a little bit more of them. Control Shift A to select similar. I'm going to add the pink furniture material to it. And now we're going to make sure that those objects are actually excluded from our list. So let's just add it in. Excluded, and we have this beautiful pinkish color. And now let's add a little bit more. So we're going to go for the floor. Again, the material was discussed in the previous videos of ours, so I'm not going to go into detail, but to be honest, this is just texture added to Corona material multi-texture, set to material ID or mesh element, depends on what you need. Corona Uvw randomizer, this is the settings that you can use to your advantage, and of course the floor itself is really easy to set up. So as you can see, it's just reflection 1, glossiness 0.07, and nothing really else was done to further enhance this material. Why? Because as I said, Corona allows you to be really strict and go easier on your materials. You don't have to waste any time on setting up those materials that you just don't have to, because it uses physically based materials. It's going to allow you a lot of artistic freedom. Again, the black frames for the windows are nothing special. Because I didn't want to add any chamfers to it, I added Corona round edges, which is going to allow me to get a little bit of round edges around the corners of this object. And let's examine how it actually works. It's a huge time saver when it comes to objects like this, where you just don't know if you actually want to add any detail. So okay, we also need to select those middle lines and do the same with them. So let's just do it like this. So again, black frame. Now, as you can see, it's already recalculated. And now let's add a little bit of the detail to it. As I said, we're going to check out the rounding edges. Now, the model itself is totally flat, and it's basically, as you can see, not perfect. But that's perfect for us because it's going to look more realistic. And thanks to the round edges map that is exclusive for Corona, you're actually able to create a little bit of rounding, and that's going to allow you to get a little bit better effects with your scene. So again, let's go ahead and continue by adding the white frames to our other objects. So let's just go for it. So we've got this frame. Now the white frame is basically the same material as the previous one. Again, set to, let's say 65, because it's a little bit more, it's going to be a little bit more matte than the floor itself. So let's make it 65 when it comes to glossiness. And now let's continue. Let's deselect it from our override. So it's going to, again, allow us to work a little bit faster and add a little bit more materials. So now all that is left is to deselect or detach from our, okay, so blue furniture. Let's just add this material to the statue. So basically we're covering all the objects all together as we go. So let's just add it in. To save a little bit time, I'm not going to go through the process of the chairs because it's just, again, basic material and a little bit of trickery. So we're just going to make sure that those objects are already deselected from our override. But now we have a little bit of problem. Look at this. We've got materials that are not compatible with Corona. That is, the Corona Light doesn't really support V-Ray materials. So what we can do, we can stop our render for a second, go for Corona Converter and click on Start Conversion. So that is going to basically change all of those materials that are not supported at this moment into supported material. That is really going to be a huge time saver for all of you guys, because just transitioning from V-Ray to Corona is going to be that easy. And now let's select this spheres to make sure that the converter was able to handle it. If it didn't, it's okay. We can still use this map. And it was. So let's just make sure that this material is correctly set up. So we don't need this albedo. I don't know why people do this, but they often try to add a lot of Fresnel, but at the same time they forget to play a little bit with the color. So I'm just going to reduce this and add a bit of glossiness because we still need this nice shining. By the way, guys, remember that setting up your materials to ridiculous amount, let's say color to 2.255, it's not going to leave any extra space for your reflections, and your colors are just going to be burned out. So avoid it as fire, like fire. So did we cover the small glass detail on the right hand side windows? No, not yet. We're going to get there in a second. So let's just now try to add this here. Now re-render with our done materials. So it actually starts to look really good. Now let's go and check out the material on the right side. So it's the window material, which is actually going to be a little bit tricky, but still easy to do, because we want to avoid adding any extra detail to it that is unnecessary. So we're just going to, we just created a regular plane. So let's just see it. So hide unselected. It's just a plane with glass material on it. Added thickness of a few centimeters, so it's actually visible, and Uvw mapping, so we're able to map it using our gradient. Why gradient? Because using gradient like this is going to allow you to create a really nice bump. So let's just go for it and create Corona material and add it in. Now I'm going to change this preview type into box, so you're going to be able to see the effect a little bit better. Now we have this gradient that is just repeating itself. So it's basically mirrored, reflected, and tiled gradient. So let's just check it out, set it up. So it's basically the really the basic gradient that you would see. Well, this is just basic, so I'm not sure what else can I say about it. But as I said, we try to use the most easiest solutions to our problems. Now, by adding this as a bump, I'm able to add a little bit of this detail to it. So as you can see, by going for bump and going for Corona bump converter, I'm able to add this fine detail to my object. And now we're just going to do the same with this glass. As you can see, it's basically the same premise, but the glass material reacts a little bit differently to it. So all we need to do is make sure that the bump is set to a little bit higher value than 0.1. So 1 is going to be enough most of the time, but you don't have to stick to it. So now this is not a thin glass, remember, that's why we added this thickness. So it's actually going to create this effect. You can add a bit of glossiness to it, but it's also going to add a little bit of more to the render time, so I would suggest you to avoid it. And now let's say okay, now we only have one material left to add, and that is going to be actually the best trick of all. So let's select those 3 elements, actually 4 elements, or maybe 5 elements. Actually, is it 5? Yes, it is 5. So we've got those 5 elements. So let's just hide unselected. As you can see, this is the floor panel, the windows, and the sides. So now we're going to create a special material for this occasion, because we want to control where the line is drawn and where we actually want this blue wall to appear and where we don't want it. That's why we're going to use Corona distance map. Wall white is going to be our base material, so let's just add it to this selection. Now we're going to make sure that all of those objects are deselected and we no longer need material override. So unhide all, start interactive, and let's see for a second how it looks like. I already mentioned that we copied this material from the Corona library, so we don't need to go through it, but it's basically there. So now the materials are almost done. As always, the wall material doesn't need a lot of trickery. Sometimes people like to add a glossiness to their walls, but that tremendously increases the rendering time. So I would suggest you to avoid it at all costs. But if you just need to do it, try to add this in a subtle manner. Now let's go ahead and add Corona layered material, which is going to be our base material with white wall. Now we're still adding this material. And as our first layer on top of this object, we're going to add this blue wall. But if we do it this way, it's just going to cover all these materials, and well, it's not exactly what we were going for. That's why we also are going to create one extra object, which is going to be a distance box, which, well, I'm just going to create a box. Okay, that should be enough. Convert to and object properties. This is a very important step. You should basically remember about it. Renderable off. By the way, guys, for those of you that just tuned in, we are VizAcademy, and welcome to our free webinar. We're actually getting closer to finishing our render, but we're still going to jump into Photoshop to work with it for a little bit, and then we're going to call it a day. But VizAcademy is an online school that is going to teach you how to create beautiful renders in 5 to 7 weeks. Why 5 to 7? Because you can choose interiors and interiors plus exterior scores. That means that you'll be able to pick which option you like, and of course what is very important is that we already closed our January group recruitation, so you can no longer join our January group, but the March group or well, late March group is registration is now open. So if you want to join, do it now, because we never really had such a big traffic. And I must say, guys, that it's we're running out of slots. And if you want to join in, do it as soon as possible, because I think that the Christmas is working on everybody, and they just wanted to give themselves something special, and that is a VizAcademy online course. So our VizAcademy online course works like this. The first week we try to teach you, and we actually do, how to model. Then we go to the white rendering and setting up the lights. That's what we basically done so far. Create materials, that's also covered already in this webinar, and of course we're going to finalize our render. So this is the moment when we try to go back and forth with our model, redo some elements and add a little bit more detail, because you don't always know what detail is going to be necessary for your shot. Then we go, we finish our interiors and we start working with exteriors solely. So the last 2 weeks are going to be for exteriors only. Of course, if you choose exteriors as well. And the learning effect is pretty much visible on our Instagram. You can go ahead and visit our Instagram, and let's say, for example, Eric, this is something amazing, and I always loved this render, and I actually still do. So you can visit his Instagram, as well as his friend Attila actually joined our VizAcademy online course, and he was also able to finish it with tremendous results. So all of those students that I mentioned are really good, but as you can see, we don't have bad students. We just have students that well, do a tremendous job. I'm really proud of all of them, and I must say that well, this is really amazing to see so many so good work. So now let's continue with our rendering and actually do the trick. So let's do the thing by going to Material Editor, and we're going to introduce you guys to Corona Distance Map. It's going to be very easy to work with. So for now, we're going to set up the 0 on distance far. So distance far means the white color. Remember, White color means 100% of effect. Black color means 0% of effect. In this case, we actually need white only inside of this object. So we're going to go for color inside, copy it from this white color here, paste it in, and of course we're going to copy this black color and paste it again. We don't need any near and far distance because it's just, we don't need any gradients at this moment. So how are we going to use it? We're going to use it as a mask for our object. So you can already see that Corona actually informs us that something is going on and something is wrong. So no distance objects. So let's just go ahead, double click on Corona distance material, add this box that we already know that is going to be our magic trick, and we're just going to move this box inside of this room. Since it's not going to be renderable, it's going to basically create this nice effect inside of this interior. So let's just continue and add a little bit more of this effect. By the way, I'm going to select all of those objects that basically created this green color. So I guess we need to cover a little bit more objects. Yep. Now let's just stretch this out so it's going to actually look properly. So we need this floor to go inside of this room. So now it's going to look more professional because this floor has some finish. And now let's play around with our box a little bit more. So this is our basic shape, so it doesn't really have to be a box. It can be a sphere or cylinder, whatever you choose. And now by simply scaling it up or down, we're able to change the size of this blue wall. That's amazing because we're able to control it and we don't have to slice and dice all of those objects that we haven't seen. Well, it's just an easy solution to create maps like this, and especially if you don't have enough time to work with materials that you just don't want to master. And now we still need to add this furniture, blue furniture material to this counter, so it's going to take a second, but guys, thank you very much, Vivianka, for joining us, and see you in our class, because Vivianka just joined our VizAcademy online course. So I would say that, well, she's going to learn a lot from us. Again, let's now select this object, add the final material. So that's actually furniture. Let me just go back, blue furniture. Again, click it, and well, everything checks out. We've done it in almost an hour. Basically, I was trying to be as fast as possible, but you asked so many good questions, but that it would be really a shame to ignore that. Anyway, guys, we were able to create this in under an hour. So without wasting your time for renders and everything else, I moved this into Photoshop already. So when you work with 3ds Max and you create something that is going to look photorealistic, always try to render out your white render, because most of the people are just not going to understand that this is not a photo. And with Corona quality, you're going to basically be able to fool people that you're a great photographer, but in reality you're just a great 3D artist. So that's one of the things I would strongly recommend you. And now we have this render. As I said, with Corona Renderer, you rarely need to do anything with your renders whatsoever. So as I said, I rendered this out earlier, but I haven't really noticed this one small problem on the right side. So we can just select some of those tiles and try to move it by simply going for free transform, but it's just not going to be necessary in this case because it's just not going to be noticeable, and that's not exactly the key element of our webinar for today. So let's just move it here, try to add a little bit of speckle, and as you can see, it's barely visible at this moment, but it's not really necessary to add it, and I don't want to be that sloppy. So how are we going to add the post-production? most of the time it's not going to be problematic at all, and that's exactly what I like to do. But before we actually jump into it, as I said about VizAcademy online course, if you want to join our VizAcademy online course, remember to go to www.vizacademy.uk. That is going to open this site where you will find all the necessary informations. So you can check out the pricing over here by clicking on this link. You can choose the option that you're interested in, and of course right now we have this nice discount of 40%, and that's solely because Christmas and everything else. So at this moment the exteriors course is 1,700, and now let's choose a plan. Once you choose a plan, you can fill in this you'll fill in this information, and this is the first step to become our student. More information will be sent out later on, but if you want to enroll, please follow this pricing links list, pick whichever option you like, and of course join VizAcademy by choosing your plan. Now let's go back to our rendering, because I forgot to actually tell you about one beautiful thing, which is almost exclusive for Corona renderer, and that is light mix. So this is basically one of the best elements of Corona, which I basically love. You're able to use your to change your materials, I mean your light setup in real time in Corona just by going into light mix. That's something really unheard of. You're able to add 10,000 moods in just one interior by changing one or two things, and by adding totally different light power, light color. It's going to allow you, well, limitless options, and this is a tool really used and abused in my day-to-day professional work, because I just love how it works. It can change totally the mood of your room, I mean your interior, exterior, and it's basically going to be a free cheat when you want to do a little bit of more artistic style rendering. Why should you actually use it? Well, mostly because it's going to allow you to surprise your client with a lot of moods, a lot of options, and well, you can actually see how amazingly good it works. Now let's go back to Photoshop and try to use a little bit of exposure, and as always I try to make sure that my post-production is kept to minimum. So I try to just go back and forth with exposure, contrast, highlights, but most of the time the textures are really helpful. Clarity is going to add this HDRI look, but just don't overdo it. Dehaze is going to pretty much allow you to get rid of some of the let's say foggy look in your scene, so you're going to be able to get there. But to get into a really photographic look, you need to add some effects like vignetting. That's always going to be very welcomed by your clients. Now, the last thing I always do is Hsl settings. You can basically make sure that all the colors are set up to your needs. And if you need to change just a little bit the tone of your colors, or change something in your scene that just stands out, this is where you go. And now I'm not going to actually add any Hsl settings, because it's just not necessary, because Corona actually is that amazing and it doesn't require you to do anything else than just go ahead and render. Now this is our final render, done almost solely with Corona renderer in 1 hour 20 minutes. So guys, thank you very much for your attention, and remember to visit our website, that's VizAcademy.uk. Click on pricing to choose the option that you're interested in, and of course we're going to be able to contact you later on. Remember that 75% of our students actually started from zero, so no prior knowledge of 3ds Max or 3D is required. So join us at any time and join the March group, because January group is already full. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you in another webinar.